Back in my Shadowrun Returns Dragonfall review, I called 2014 potentially the year of Western RPGs, ergo a year that has seen so many decent WRPG releases that one would consider it a revival of a long-lost genre. Shadowrun Returns Dragonfall, of course, was a nicely done first stepping stone towards that goal, but in order for the year to have actual significance, more games of comparable or higher quality were needed, and I went ahead and named a few that had potential. Well, my Shadowrun review is now a few months in the past, and I can welcome you to the future, where one of these games that I named, Divinity Original Sin, is out and awaits proper inspection. And I hopefully will be forgiven for spoiling my whole opinion on the game in the first few paragraphs of this review, but Divinity Original Sin is the shit. And believe me, I do not give this praise lightly at all. Obviously, this is a very personal statement to make, but I find this to be the best release in video games since 2011, which was the year Dark Souls came out, a game that currently resides in my top 3 games of all time. And I'd have to go even farther back to early 2009 to find a game standing strictly on a single player experience as absorbing as Divinity Original Sin. In fact, I only have one major criticism about this game, and I want to start with that: the companions. Prior to the game's release, I read in a few internet boards that this game was setting out to be a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate 2. But you know how it goes. People see an upcoming isometric RPG and go, holy shit, spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate 2 confirmed. The same thing goes for Planescape Torment, by the way. And I didn't follow Divinity's development much, so I don't know if the developers actually drew that comparison themselves or someone on the internet put it out of his arse, but the fact of the matter is, the game is not like Baldur's Gate 2, and nowhere is this more apparent than on the subject of companions. In regard to companions with actual personality traits, there's only 2 of them. One healing support mage and one female warrior, and you get them early in the game, so they're more supposed to cover the basis of a classic RPG party constellation than giving you actual interesting companions. Later in the game you will find someone who can provide you with a bigger variety of mercenaries, however those don't feature any personality, so their only purpose is to give you access to more abilities and classes. And yeah, your 2 original companions will sometimes weigh in with their dumb opinions and go on your tits, you know, like RPG companions usually do, but the problem is that they're neither very fleshed out nor likable. The mage, for example, makes you swear in his first conversation with you no less that you will never start any pacts with demons while you travel together. As out of the blue as that was already, throughout the rest of the game he then keeps pestering you about the glory of achieving motherfucking immortality through necromancy, apparently completely oblivious to the fact that this game's story sends you to cave after cave filled with failed experiments of other necromancers. And they later try to follow up on that whole story and its motivation, but really, Jahan, you're fooling nobody. You're one giant delusional cunt, and this game doesn't have much to offer in terms of party members, which is a shame because that's usually one of the most interesting parts of RPGs. However, let's not dwell on the shittiness. One of the things that Divinity does absolutely right, and better than most RPGs I know, is the entirety of the combat system. Combat itself is turn-based, as is popular with current indie RPGs, and this game manages to incorporate everything a good RPG needs for combat to be enjoyable. Namely, a bazillion of stats, skills and resistances that all affect your character's fighting prowess and varied, yet challenging encounters in every corner of the map. Unlike, for example, in Dungeons & Dragons, mages are quite balanced compared to warriors, thieves and archers, because all of these classes feature enough potential skills to diversify their gameplay. Also, this may sound trivial to some, but I think everyone who played a lot of Western RPGs can relate. I downright applaud Larian Studios for creating a stealth mechanic that is actually fucking useful and even goddamn manages to complement a dexterity-based melee rogue in combat. I appreciate it because that is usually the class I'm going for, and for once I get to play a main character that has more party contribution than opening the occasional locked door. The absolute icing on all of this is a fantastic set of environmental effects which open up a staggering amount of tactical combat tools. Destroy a barrel with a black drop on it, for example, to create a pool of oil. Then ignite it with a fire spell or weapon. Destroy the oil barrel with a fire spell directly and it will not only ignite the surroundings but also explode on impact. When everyone's dead, just wash away the whole mess with a water spell. Or even better, stealth in before combat, stack 3 oil barrels on top of each other unnoticed, stealth out, send in a fireball, see everyone blow up and then teleport the remaining survivors right into that inferno. Naturally, this game is even more than just blowing up oil barrels. Water spells, for example, will erase most environmental effects and replace them with puddles of water that can be electrified. Poisonous gas clouds can be ignited, steam clouds can be charged with lightning, and ice spells will create slippery surfaces. There are blizzards and sandstorms that slow your movement, lava that will kill everything it touches instantly, and so on and so on. What's so amazing about these mechanics is that A, they are featured in nearly every fight, B, they can work for and against you and enemies will utilize them as well, and C, they can lead to fucking hilarious results. And believe me, an experience like planning and executing the stacked barrels of oily fun plan that I described earlier is something that your latest AAA shootout simulator just can't deliver. The boss fights especially can be really tense and creative. This often leads to scenarios where multiple strategies are absolutely viable, and it emphasizes the deep and organic combat system of this game quite nicely. The best example of this would probably be the fight against King Boreas, who throws around so much summoning and environmental effects that the encounter could have been taken directly from World of Warcraft. You know, before World of Warcraft turned to shit. Of course, with a lot of complexity comes a lot of balancing issues, and I will say that if you know what you're doing, you can break the combat in this game so that nothing poses a challenge anymore. But in Divinity's defense, it took me quite a while to get there, and even then the last boss fight was an absolute nightmare. Then again, lacking balance is in probably every RPG or even action RPG ever, simply through the fact that balancing so many classes and upgrades is nigh impossible. So the combat is nice. What else? Well, the game is quite long too. You know, lately I've been playing a lot of games and most of them usually net you about 10 hours on your first playthrough. And I can fully understand even less playtime with smaller indie games that just don't have as much money and manpower behind them, but this also happens with big full price titles. In Divinity, after the first 10 hours, you're probably just outside the first town getting raped by zombies. The time before is spent talking to people, establishing the plot and why you came to this island in the first place. After 10 hours everything just starts, which understandably can be a bit hard to swallow for people who want to jump right into the action, but this game will last you a very long time. And that is ignoring any instant replayability of trying out other classes or playing co-op with a friend. I'm talking about 70 hours and more for playing it just once here, so you better get ready for a commitment. The reason why I wouldn't claim that this game is padded, however, even though for me some parts could have been shorter, is that arguably the greatest strength of Divinity Original Sin is exploration. Exploration is, by the way, also the reason why I loved Expeditions Conquistador so much. Those are the kind of RPGs where you start off in a little village or town, get some equipment and then off you go, into a world that is so richly detailed and holds so many secrets that you can get lost for hours. It's the kind of game I personally find the most immersive, only beaten in that regard by the Thief series. Of course, in that regard, I have to commend Larian Studios for the itemization system they put into this game, which plays out a lot like a mix between classic RPG items and Diablo 2. Item stats and drops are completely randomized and come in different rarities that differ in how many stats upgrades an item will have. This also includes a golden property for uniquely named items. The bonuses that these items can give you go from trivial upgrades like boosting armor, hit points, resistance or weapon damage, to increasing your basic attributes and traits or even temporarily giving you new skills. Anyone who ever played games like Diablo, Path of Exile or Torchlight will know how addicting item drop systems based on chance can become and how much incentive this adds to always look for new equipment for your characters. Despite being a turn-based RPG, Divinity implements this quite effectively. Of course, it doesn't end with equipment. Crafting materials, potions and even scrolls and books that teach you new skills drop randomized too. All of this heavily adds to the exploration aspects, which, as I already said, is one of Divinity's most prominent features. Because with more incentive to look for items, comes more incentive to search every area for chests and enemies. And goddamn is there ever so much fun in opening your map screen and being filled with joyful glee because you just stumbled upon a little section of the map you haven't explored yet. Now let me conclude this review by going back to the start. At the beginning I said that I have only one major criticism for this game, so some might ask the question now if that means everything else in Divinity Original Sin is perfect. And the answer to that is no. I wouldn't expect anyone to cream their pants over this game's soundtrack, dialogue or the story. All of these things are neither really good nor are they bad. They're just, well, adequate, passable, basically alright, and never a deal breaker. Still, a lesson that I think needs to be taught to everyone who plays a video game is that games don't need to be perfect to be great. And they rarely are. Of course, story, writing and soundtrack are important for RPGs, don't get me wrong. I won't pretend like they're very well done in this game because they're not. But Divinity has weaknesses and it has strengths. And what it does well, it does better than most other games that it can be compared to. And for that alone, I recommend it to everyone with even a passing interest in role-playing games.